that's something I think we each individually need to measure, but I think also it's something where you've got to kind of go through that process yourself. And it's a very personal journey because ultimately these relationships with these people are very unique. And I've seen that with my own family. And in that my relationship was very different and I with my mother at a time in her life that was very different than the time that my sister was with her, and that created very different experiences and very different viewpoints of who and what our mother was for both of us. So in terms of caring for myself, I do a horrible job of that generally, and I think a lot of people do, and I think a lot of people either try to put it aside like I do, or you know, um, don't give themselves the credit to be human and really understand that it is a really unique relationship. That was something that was very obvious within the initial points of the article. Was these are very important people in our lives, and I think one of the comments in one of the articles I read was the person was thought to themselves like, I can't believe I don't have a mom. And I think that's something that's really challenging too, because we still do. It's just that connection now, it's not there, right? And I think that's part of that struggle too, is trying to figure out for myself, you know, um, remember those good times and remember how much of what I am, good and bad, is a product of who that person is. And if depending on your viewpoint of your parent, that comes with its own challenges, both positive or negative, depending on what that is. But certainly, we each have to kind of address that individually within the structure of our own relationship with our parent. And it's definitely not easy. Share memories. So I did actually a lot of that with the family. And one of the things that was really interesting was the family had some, positive memories. My mother dealt with a lot of pain in her later years. And I think a lot of people were happy that she wasn't going to need to deal with that anymore. And that became a bit of a topic of the conversation, which helped me a bit, because that also was like, okay, yeah, there's a bit of relief there. And that gives you a little bit of relief yourself, I guess you could say. But it was interesting to share some memories. Certainly for many of the family, they weren't totally positive, so that became challenging. So that became more of an internal process within myself. And I found if I started thinking about mom late at night, what I would do was just start going down some of those happy roads that we walked together, and being thankful for them. And that was, again, just part of those things. And it was weird because if you had asked me early on whether I thought that was important, I probably would have said no. But what I found was, as the time went on and it became increasingly clear that I wasn't fully dealing with it, then obviously that importance escalated from that point on. So honor their memory. That becomes a challenging one. Again, I don't think anyone can tell anyone else how to do that because these relationships are so individual. But certainly, I've tried to do that and be thankful for the time that I did have mom, and realize, that she definitely did the best she could within the context she understood. And I think, you know, there's people out there that, will be able to say that, and others that won't. And I think that'll be part of that personal journey, is kind of figuring out where you fall along that particular fault line. And then that ties into forgive them, and that's I never really blame mom because I always understood a large amount of her human experience and how she got to where she got to around a number of different topics, and ultimately what led to her being fairly unhappy and bitter at the end. But I never, I didn't find it functional to constantly blame her for that, because I had seen in so many different intervals that had become a barrier in our own relationship. So I think the forgiving part I had done a lot earlier on, and I'd had to do for everybody, because ultimately, you know if you can do it, it becomes an ability to just kind of not have that chip on your shoulder with things that have happened in the past. And I think that's also important for ourselves. And some people can and some can't, and it's not a judgment by any token. I've certainly encouraged some members of my family to cut the string and get on with life, because it was pretty clear it wasn't going to work. that's I think a very individual decision everybody has to make, and like anything, that's going to come with its pluses and minuses, certainly at times when that person's no longer around as well. Accept help is a good one. I didn't have too much of an issue with that, but I think it's because I'm fairly open with people, and I have a great bunch of friends who are there to listen to me and be there for me as well. And we've talked about a lot of those things, and um, so I would say, if you have the right people to share it with, that can also be very helpful. Um, Embrace family was something I did. I'm talking with some members of my family much more frequently, and honestly putting a lot more effort into it. It feels a lot more important now than it did, and maybe that's the real lesson for myself in all of this, is understanding that these relationships are very important, and um, you know the effort is always worth it, and there's people that really count on us, and giving our time to them is valuable, and you only have so many family members. And again, that's easy to say when a family has had 20, 30, 40 plus years of challenges, and it's been they've been unable to get over it. But certainly for my own family, um, it's something that I wanted to do, and not worry too much about the past, but really worry about the time that remains to try to share that as best we can. So I think that's maybe one of the ones that I've maybe been a little bit more successful in. Uh, so now we're getting into the kind of more professional stuff, and this is the consider support groups and talk to a therapist, and I would agree with that. I think it's a very individual experience, and it's based on your relationship, it's based on who you are as a person and what you need to get through these things. And I think that's something where my only comment would be to myself, and to anyone else, would be just be honest with yourself. Um, that's a very challenging thing to do sometimes, but I think that's the only way to figure out the correct way to go about it. And then you have to kind of do it in a non-judgmental factor. I think if anyone had asked me, would I still be thinking this much about it a year later, I never would have imagined it. But here we are. So at that point, I have to look at myself and go, okay, well, what is the point of that? Like, what is the message in there? What do I need to learn? And that became pretty clear that I needed to put in some work to address it, and to do some of those things. And one of the things that I've talked to with my better half is planting a rose bush with some of mom's ashes, because she loved rose bushes, and so that's something I want to do to honor her. And so these are the types of things that you kind of got to work your way through as an individual, and you know it becomes a very kind of, I guess, a personal, but hopefully supported by people around you, journey. But it is very personal because of the nature of the relationship. And then talking to a therapist, I can't say that that is not something that you should do if you want to, because that is something I have a close friend that did see somebody over some stuff he was going through, and he said it was very beneficial. So I think it would be wise to consider that as a valid option, and maybe more particularly if you don't have that great support network, or a lot of people you can talk to, or you need that impartial person to talk to, because maybe um some of the people you talk to have a different view of the individual than you do, and it just becomes hard to share some of that stuff if those people haven't had that same experience with the person. So that's kind of how I would view that. And I think for myself, I realize now I've just basically kind of got to walk the road, and that's what I would say to anyone who's kind of going through it. Is it's I think a great equalizing factor in life is something that we all have to deal with, is that type of loss, and the only way to do that is to walk the road, as unpleasant as it is. It's kind of like realizing you don't have a I mean, it's a terrible analogy, but realizing you don't have a raincoat and you got to walk 10 kilometers in the road. And it's like, well, I better get on with it then, because the rain ain't going away anytime today. So that's how I'd approach that one. And that's how I've tried to deal with it. Certainly from a takeaway standpoint, for myself, it's just realizing that it is going to be a much more extended process than I ever would have imagined. I thought that it would be kind of relatively short and I would be able to deal with everything fairly easily, but that certainly hasn't proven to be the case. And it was interesting. I was watching, I think it was a soccer game. Can't remember if it was the UEFA or the Copa championships that are on right now, but one of the players had recently lost his mother, and seeing the emotion and realizing, that it's something that a lot of people are going through, and it was interesting in the sense that obviously, feel great about it, but you realize that it is a very shared experience, and I certainly saw some of my own emotion within him, and it was very interesting that way. And I guess that's part of not feeling alone as well, as realizing that, you know to a large degree, whether it be fully, positive or fully negative feelings about it, we all feel feelings about, these important people in our lives that are no longer with us. So hopefully you got some value from that. I know talking about it certainly helps me, and that's, again, as I mentioned, part of why I'm trying to do this. Is it's partly my own journey, but partly hopefully a shared journey for people going through it. So similar to the last episode, I want to just interject here with more of the kind of the discussion points, if you will. So I guess the question is, how do you feel about how you were able to care for yourself? Were you able to put yourself first, or were you able to recognize that you needed that, or maybe it was somebody else nearby who reminded you that you've got to look after yourself as well? So how did that go? Was it a struggle, or were you able to do that one? And then for sharing memories and honoring their memory, I guess be interesting to know what people did for their family, and how that helped them. I know, as I think I mentioned within the video, that I definitely would like to plant a rose bush and put some of mom's ashes there, and know that that's her, and all those things. And I think that's a very it's something that you need to do and you need to go through, and I'd be very, curious what things help people with that. I know I had a few pictures of my mom up in my office as well, from some of her very happy days of doing some of the things she loved to do as well. So and then, a really important one, depending on that relationship, were you able to forgive them? And I think that's gonna be a very personal one based on the relationship. I think there will probably be people that say they were unable to, and then there were people that, you know, were able to say, yes, I was able to get over some of the things that maybe hurt me. So that would also be a very interesting one to see how people were able to address that one. I know for my mom, I had forgiven her many years in advance and accepted her as the human she was, and so I that was one that I didn't have to focus on as much. Were you able to accept help and embrace family, or were you alone in it? Did you feel like you had to struggle alone, and maybe, similar to me, and my family, I have some family that I can talk to about it, but others that I wouldn't, and that's partially for my benefit and partially for their benefit, and I know generally who those people are that want to talk about it and don't. So but how did you go with that? Did that help you, or did you find that just kind of keeping to yourself was the way you had to deal with it? And then when we get into the support groups and talking to a therapist, I think that's something that, each person needs to individually consider. But I wouldn't rule it out. I have had friends, as I think I mentioned, that have done some counseling, and they got a lot from it. And I think having that impartial voice can be very, very beneficial when you need a sounding board. Sometimes you can't get that same level of feedback from somebody who has a long history in the situation as well, or that objectivity, which is fair. And it's not anyone's fault if they can't be objective about the situation, but there are points where it is very beneficial to have somebody who can be objective about it as well. So and then what I'll do is I'll sum this up maybe in another episode, and we'll sum it up as the final takeaway. And maybe as time goes on, I'll do an addendum to the overall videos if there's some comments or some relevant information that I could maybe share with everybody. So we'll go for that too. But for right now, we'll call this one at an end. And so I hope you're having a great day, and I hope you're taking care of yourself. And we'll talk to you again real soon.